Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here. This is an important topic, but there is so many things going on in our lives. It's hard to get people to tear away even for an hour and a half. And so I know your time is valuable. I hope that at the end of our presentation, you will consider it time well spent. I think it's appropriate that this slide is up here because there's a question mark at the very end of the sentence. It's a good question. Ultimately, just from the police department's perspective, I think everyone here knows that the police department's job is to educate the community. And I think we do a pretty good job here at the Fountain Valley Police Department in doing that. Now, we do it in a lot of different ways. We do it on our Facebook page, our website, fvpd.org, and we do it through our crime prevention officer, Joanne Minnie, and through our many partners and volunteers throughout the community. The topic might be distracted driving. People, constantly on their cell phones while we're driving. We warn people about other public safety issues, like, for example, how to avoid identity theft, or how to harden your target in your home against burglary, or these guys that are just driving around following the FedEx trucks and picking up packages off porches. So we're constantly talking to our community about public safety concerns. And this presentation tonight is part of that. So first of all, let me introduce myself. I'm Dan Lorenz, for those of you who I've not met, and welcome to the Recreation Center here. Before we get started, I want to recognize also the fact that we're putting this together, the police department is, but we're doing it with the help of all the city staff, and we work together to, I think, arm in arm. There's 220 of us, I think, in the city, plus dozens and dozens of incredible volunteers to keep Fountain Valley a nice place to live. And this, I hope, is part of that effort. So I hope that, thank you. It's always nice getting applause. If it's never happened to you, I recommend it. The last time I got applause was just a few hours ago at Cox Elementary School. So, that was kind of cool too. But the way we're going to do our presentation tonight is, instead of listening to me, we have reached out to two subject matter experts that I hope will be able to share important information in the form of data, in the form of science, in the form of research, and in the form of their opinion based on their experience and their education. And so first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite Judge Anderson to speak to you. And let me just tell you a little bit about him. And after his remarks have concluded, then I'm going to come up again and introduce Dr. Sabat and let you know a little bit more about him. And that will conclude our evening. And I hope, again, that time passes swiftly and you're able to learn quite a bit. If you would like additional information, we have graphic little handouts over there at that table, and then we are constantly pushing out information at our website and on our Facebook page, and these two gentlemen will also reference places where you can get additional information. So, without any further delay, let me introduce Judge Anderson. Judge Anderson began his legal career as a sole practitioner and then served as a criminal defense attorney at the LA Public Defender's Office after attending UCLA and Southwestern University School of Law. Judge Anderson served 10 years as a prosecutor here in our county and then was appointed to the Orange County Municipal Court in 1988, and which later became the Superior Court. So Judge Anderson is a Superior Court judge. He is currently the presiding judge of Harbor Court in Newport Beach, where he supervises 2 drug courts and a DUI treatment court. The Harbor DUI Court was recently selected for the 3rd time as a National DWI Academy Teaching Court by the National Center for DWI Courts. In addition to his work with drug and DUI court duties, Judge Anderson supports other treatment court programs, including Veterans Court, Homeless Outreach Court, and Mental Health Courts. Judge Anderson is a regular speaker and panelist and was a featured speaker at the Prescription for Life and Weed Through the Myths series presented by the Orange County Sheriff's Department, the Orange County Department of Education, and the National Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence. So please join me in welcoming His Honor, Judge Anderson.
Thank you, Chief. Whoa, that's loud. You can hear me, right? Excellent. Again, thank you for the kind introduction. Okay, why am I here tonight? I am here tonight for something the Chief just referenced, public safety. Because I'm sick and tired of people dying of drug overdoses. And I am sick and tired of the proliferation of drugs throughout our county, our state, our nation. This is an issue that's being debated now across all political aisles, right? Well, what's really happening here is people are really dying. And marijuana contributes to what we're seeing here, and we're going to give you some information. One of the reasons I'm here as well is because there's a real shortage of truth going on. This was reported in the newspaper not long ago. We have more drug overdoses for more than 10 years. Actually, it's longer than I can remember. That's how long we've been having, we've had people dying more recently, longer than I can remember. And I've been doing this for 16 straight years as a drug court judge. I was appointed as a judge 18 years ago, and what I'm seeing all the time is the people who come before us in our drug courts. If you're not sure what that is, these are people who have committed crimes, a variety of crimes. They're brought into the criminal justice system and they're suffering from addiction. And what we try to do is intersect treatment for addiction and helping with their criminal violations. This is what we're trying to achieve. And we're very successful at it when we get them into the programs. But what's happening is we're getting a lot of bad information. So over the years, what I've collected are autobiographical accounts from the people in our programs. We ask them to write an autobiography of their drug use. And what we do is we have them talk about how they got into drugs. And these are people that are being treated for heroin addiction, methamphetamine addiction, cocaine addiction, pill addiction, marijuana addiction, alcoholism. And I'm talking about Alvaro and Dylan and Reese and Nicholas and Ashley and Roberto and Sarah and Arthur and Jeremy and Brandon. I won't read the whole list because I've got files full of this, of people who talk about the fact that they started smoking weed when they were 13, 14, 15, 16 years old and using alcohol. Almost every single person in my drug court programs who were treating for addictions for heroin and methamphetamine and marijuana addiction and pills, they all started using as children. Almost all of them. It's something we have to pay attention to and ask questions why. Those who are pushing marijuana into our homes, our schools, our children's brains and bodies are not dealing with the truth. So the hope tonight is that what happens is you start to get introduced to the other side that you never hear. Because you just don't get a lot of truth if you're really trying to pay attention to this issue. And it can be devastating. It is devastating. And it's become a major public health issue for us here in this county and in this state. Tonight you're going to get some facts. Certainly Dr. Sabat is a national, if not international, expert in this field. We're very fortunate to have him here. And I'm really glad you get to hear the truth that he's going to be talking about. I don't know if you can see this picture very well, but the other side doesn't want you to know the truth. They don't think you can handle it or they want to misrepresent it. But I absolutely am convinced that the truth is something you need to know, you can handle. Do you think you already know everything you need to know about marijuana? No. And the reason I know the answer to that is no, because I study this. I know Dr. Sabat studies this, and I don't know everything because every single day something new is happening. Every day a new study comes out. We have these laboratories now. They're called Colorado and Washington, and these places where legalization and other proliferation of marijuana is revealing the incredible devastation that causes people's minds and bodies because of this drug. And when you say marijuana, you're talking about a drug that is very, very different than the drug that some people think about from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. It's a highly concentrated, highly addictive, highly dangerous, and by the way, unregulated substance. So you do need to know everything. You want to know as much information as you can about this drug so you can make good decisions. I'm not here to tell you what to do one way or the other, but I am here to give you solid, factual information that comes from my experience dealing with people who've been suffering from addiction forever. Who's pushing this drug? Politicians, marijuana patients, so-called, marijuana businesses, celebrities, media, social media. The answer is all of the above. All of the above. These folks are like, in political terms, a super PAC for the marijuana industry. They push this stuff forward at every opportunity. How about marijuana patients? I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time with this, but think about this. What we call medical marijuana is a strategy. It began back in the 70s with a group of individuals, one of the co-founders with this guy, Keith Stroop, from the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, and they had a strategy. They wanted to give marijuana a good name. And so this famous or infamous quote from Keith Stroop says, "We'll be using," and what he was talking about was medical marijuana, "as a red herring to give marijuana a good name." For those of you who don't know what a red herring is, it's something that is intended to be misleading or distracting. This was a strategy in order to push this drug forward, and it's worked amazingly well. It was a strategy to mislead and distract people, and if you start to ask questions about whether it's true, they say you're not compassionate, right? You don't care about people who need this desperately need this medicine, and by the way, it's a hoax. The whole thing is a big hoax. And this guy, Alan St. Pierre, still working for the National Organization of Marijuana Laws, many years ago, he just confirmed what we already know. This is his quotation. In California, marijuana has been de facto legalized under the guise of medical marijuana. You know what rhymes with guise? Lies. Because that's exactly what this is. Pure lies that have been pushed forward and are still being pushed forward. They knew exactly what they were doing. That's how the so-called Compassionate Use Act got passed in California. And now that is the basis. That is the basis. That is the foundation for what they're trying to do to push legalization through. And of course, it's medicine, right? These are the offices. Here's your doctor's offices, right? These are the doctor's offices. This is where you go to see the Cush doctor. This is where you go to see Doctor Is In, right? To get this medicine that you need so desperately. And by the way, you know, Dr. Sabat will probably talk a little more articulately about the potential medical benefits of cannabis, or THC. But let's really be honest about it. People are going there to get high. The kids who are coming into my courtroom showing me a medical marijuana card, they're doing that to justify the fact that they want to go out and get high, not because they have some medical condition that requires it. And of course, the media knows this, including the Orange County Register. They actually sent a reporter out in February of this year, just not a few months ago, to see if she could get her medical marijuana card. She had no problem whatsoever. She spent more time brushing her teeth than she did talking to a doctor. And all the doctor asked her to do was say, "Hey, tell me what you think you might need medical marijuana for." So she said, "Well, you know, every once in a while I get a headache." And what did they do? They took her $200 and they gave her a card. And she went and joined the festival of patients. Pot companies, how about these folks? This is about big money. Make no mistake. What is happening in our state, what is happening in Colorado, what is happening in Washington, what is happening everywhere is about big money. This is about people making big money. Recently, a guy, by the way, who was very instrumental in the medical marijuana initiatives in California and later is pushing for medical marijuana legalization, was busted transporting $1 million worth of marijuana from Texas to Florida. I don't think he was distributing it to his patients. This is pot companies, and this is just like alcohol and tobacco companies. They need your kids addicted. They need you addicted. What did I say at the beginning? Almost every one of the addicts in my programs started using as children. That's not lost on the alcohol and tobacco companies. They know it. They need your kids using, drinking, smoking cigarettes, using weed while their brains are still developing as children. If they do that, the likelihood of them being addicted later goes up amazingly high. I don't know anybody, I'll repeat it, in my programs, except for a handful maybe, who weren't using. These are adult addicts who weren't using when they were children. And that's the way you do business if you're in one of these companies. Today's weed, today's weed, today's weed. This is not old weed. This is today's weed. And it is made up of concentrated THC, tetrahydrocannabinol in all kinds of forms. And it can be marketed in very high concentrations. And it's marketed to children. Take a look on a website from Colorado, and what are you going to find? What you're going to find is cookies and candies and sodas and waxes, all sorts of different formulations of THC. That's what you're going to find in unregulated amounts in terms of its potency. Unregulated. Back in the 70s, back in the 80s, at least for a while, you're looking at THC concentrations of what, 2, 4, 6% at the most, right? And now you're looking at THC concentrations that sometimes with these edibles are in the 30, 40% range, and you get up to the oils, you can talk about 70 or 80% concentration. That's why people are ending up in emergency rooms because of this drug. Celebrities, now these are the ones who really get me. The celebrities are the ones who really get me, right? And you know why? Because what they do is they use their platform. I don't care if they want to go sit in their mansions and smoke weed until their heads burn off, all right? I don't care. But what I do care about is when they get up on stage with a joint, when they get up on their concerts and they start smoking weed, when they come in front of everybody and show how cool they are, how rich they are, how beautiful they are, how successful they are, and they use this image to promote this drug. And by the way, in my opinion, they're a bunch of hypocrites, and I'll get to that in a bit. And here's a hypocrite for you. This would be Miley Cyrus, right? She's no longer a kid, and she's proven it every day. She's no longer Hannah Montana, right? She's Miley Cyrus. But here's what she said, quote, I don't promote it in my songs or say it or whatever. It's not like I'm sitting around telling kids to do a bunch of drugs. Really, Miley? How about the 2015 MTV Music Awards? She walked out on stage wearing an inflatable costume that said, do it, while she was smoking a joint and holding a marijuana pipe. And then she sang a song that she wrote called Do It. And here's some of the lyrics. Sing about love, love is what you need. Loving what you sing, loving smoking weed. Sing about peace, being high and free, so if you don't give an F, along with me. That's the song she sang. And here's just a note for you. MTV, which is where this was played, they have a median viewer age of 21.6 years. It is the top-rated network in the 12 to 24 age demographic. So who were you singing to, Miley? You were singing to children. That's who you were singing to. There's many, you could go on for hours about other celebrities here. Lady Gaga was the weed fairy in 2012. Rihanna was the pot bride in 2012. Aren't they lovely? Okay, these are their pictures that were posted. Now, Rihanna, as so many of you may know, if you know who she is, she's a performer, a very successful one. She also has a clothing line involving weed. She also has food products that she's pushing involving weed. And she says things like, what's the problem? I use weed almost every day. I take 6 shots of whiskey every day. What's the problem? I smoke 2 packs of cigarettes every day. What's the problem? Right? I drink 2 bottles of wine every day. What's the problem? You see the issue? That's the hypocrisy of it all. To her credit, Lady Gaga was interviewed in 2013 and admitted a dependency on marijuana, admitted she was addicted to this substance, and to this day no longer uses it. Politicians, oh, give me a break here. You think they're telling us the truth? Or are they acting through greed? Are they acting through ignorance? How about this guy, the Colorado governor, John Hickenlooper? He said this, quote, if I could have waved a wand the day after, I would have reversed the election. This was a bad idea. Well, thanks a lot, Governor. A little bit late for what's happening, because this is a picture of what's happening in Colorado now. These are the homeless high school-age kids moving there into Denver. My son happens to be 26 years old, lives in the city of Denver, and he said it's an absolute toilet, all right, due to marijuana and people moving there. Our governor's not much better. A few years ago, he was actually talking some sense. He was saying things like this: how many people can get stoned and still have a great state or a great nation? We need to stay alert more than some of the potheads might be. That was just, well, really, Governor? I think he's changing his tune now. Now what he's doing is signing laws for applications for extending and pot dispensaries. He's also having meetings with so-called groups that want to give political support because they want his support on the new initiatives that are coming up. The media, you could go forever on this, all right, but the media here is one big super PAC, no kidding, for the marijuana industry. No matter where you look, if you're looking at social media, all you're going to see almost only is a pro-marijuana propaganda. That's what you're going to see in the media, particularly in social media. CNN has a regular show. They call it, I think, Marijuana Country. It's really just an infomercial for the marijuana industry. But I'll just pick on the Register for right now. So-called conservative newspaper, right? I've got the banner in green because of their editorial policy, which is very much a pro-marijuana policy. But they don't just keep don't keep it on the editorial page. No. All these things I'm picking up here, these are front page stories of the Register picked up just since the first of the year. That's what these are. Read some of these. The pot of gold and legalized pot. California's pot activists prepare for 2016. A new older face of pot. As marijuana goes mainstream, high times, time has come. These are front page stories on the Register. This is an agenda. This is propaganda. This is an intentional message so that you start to think this is all sort of inevitable. This is all just going to happen, and we should all just sit back and take it. But this is a major public safety issue. This is the issue that we should be focusing on, I believe. Oh, and I got another page. You can just keep going with the Register. Here's some more headlines, right? March 6th, momentum building to legalize pot this year. May 28th, fall vote on cannabis initiative looks likely. June 1st, this is yesterday. Orange County Pot Shop endorses Loretta Sanchez as the marijuana industry steps up its activism to get politicians going. This was yesterday. It never stops. Okay, where are we going to find truth? Science is going to help us with this, and Dr. Sabb is going to be able to fill in this blank, I'm pretty sure, in some ways, for sure tonight. But science gives us a lot of information about the truth about this drug. I'm going to give you a little truth from addicts and alcoholics. As I said before, almost everyone addicted to other drugs started with alcohol and marijuana. Almost every single person. And I think we probably all know that just with our own personal experience. But we also know that marijuana use makes addiction to other drugs more likely, as I've already talked about. I have a whole purple file of autobiographical drug accounts that I have from the people in my programs talking about their use of marijuana as children and now being treated for heroin addiction and meth addiction and marijuana addiction and pill addiction and so forth. Here's just a couple. My freshman year of school, I started dating my first boyfriend, and then leaving school early to smoke weed. I began skipping school, ditching work, and doing hard drugs on a daily basis. Things got worse and worse. I overdosed multiple times. Thankfully, Sarah was picked up under a bridge, brought into jail, and later ended up in our drug court where we were able to help her. She's still alive. I started smoking pot and drinking my freshman year of high school. During my senior year, I was introduced to OxyContin, and shortly after heroin, I quickly became addicted and lost everything. This kid's name was Reese. I could put slides up like this for 2 hours. These are people who started using weed as kids. Truth from the courts. This is what I see every single day. What I see are people addicted to drugs, people suffering from alcoholism, people suffering from mental illness and homelessness, and this all relates to this absolute disaster that we have with drugs in this county, in this state, and in this country. Haven't we seen enough? Don't we have enough drugs in our communities? Don't we have enough drugs in our schools? The problem is already epidemic. And now we have people lying to us and talking about dumping more and more drugs our direction. There are real consequences. For those of you who might be young drivers, know this. If you are driving impaired, under the influence of marijuana, and as a result of that driving, you get in an accident and someone is killed, you can be charged with murder. Got it? Driving impaired on marijuana. Someone gets killed. You can be charged with murder. There are real consequences to this. Now, back to the hypocrisy of the celebrities, just to kind of complete the circle. I just picked 5 people, and sadly, these very talented, beautiful people died from drug overdoses. And all of their friends in the media and celebrities were so sad about their deaths. And they came up and lamented how we lost such talented people while they're up on stage smoking weed and glorifying drugs. These 5, by the way, admitted openly that they were smoking weed as children, ages 13, 14, 15, and 16. Amy Winehouse, Corey Monteith, Heath Ledger, River Phoenix, John Belushi, among others. So, we're here for some truth, finally. We're here for some honesty. Those who try to separate marijuana out and treat it differently than these other drugs are just misguided, they're ignorant, or they're deceitful. Because the science is indisputable. What the results are is indisputable. What we're seeing is indisputable. Here's the truth. Today's weed, it's dangerous, it's addictive, it's unregulated. It's not time to buy the lies. It's time to step up and do something, by the way. Well, I'm here today as a Superior Court judge and someone who deals with addicts every day because I see the devastation that we're already experiencing. And if we don't do something now, if we don't get our teachers to stand up and say, I don't want stoned kids in my classes. I don't want to try to teach these folks. And police chiefs, thank goodness the Fountain Valley Police Department is taking a real lead in this thing. Police chiefs across the state, hopefully, will get the word out about the truth about this. Leaders everywhere need to see what is really happening and get you people the truth so that you can make an informed decision about this. If we don't, the devastation that's starting to be revealed in places like Colorado and in Washington and here in California is just going to get worse. Thank you very much for having me. I'm pleased to be here.
I want to roll right into Dr. Sabet and his remarks so we don't waste any time. Let me tell you a little bit about him and his background. He is an author, a consultant. He's been an advisor to 3 United States presidential administrations. He studied, researched, and written about and implemented drug policy for almost 20 years. He has worked for the Clinton administration, the Bush administrations, and in 2011 he stepped down from serving for more than 2 years as the senior advisor to President Obama's Drug Control Center, having been the only drug policy staffer to have ever served as a political appointee in a Democrat and Republican administration. Dr. Sabet has been featured on the front page of the New York Times and virtually every major media publication and news channel on the subject of drug policy. His blog is housed at the Huffington Post, and he regularly contributes to opinion editorial pages, including the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Christian Science Monitor, and the LA Times. Dr. Sabet is the director of the Drug Policy Institute at the University of Florida as an assistant professor in the College of Medicine, Department of Psychiatry. He is a co-founder of Project SAM, which stands for Smart Approaches to Marijuana. Through Project SAM, he is a policy consultant to numerous domestic and international organizations, including the United Nations. Dr. Sabet received his doctorate in philosophy and a Master of Science from Oxford University as a Marshall Scholar in 2007 and 2002, respectively, and he received his undergraduate degree with high honors in political science from University of California at Berkeley in 2001. So, as you can see, we're bringing out the big guns tonight, folks. So, please welcome Dr. Sabet.
Thanks, Chief. I always get nervous when a police chief says we're bringing out the big guns tonight. Maybe it's because I lived on the East Coast now for too long. It's really nice to be back home. I was just a kid who grew up in Anaheim in the 90s and played sports and tried to do right. Was kind of taken under the wing of the sheriff back then. I don't know which one you're thinking about. It was Brad Gates, that one, before you start thinking anything else. But it was a wonderful guy, Sheriff Gates. And really got into this because at my junior high school, I think it's still around, El Rancho, there were a lot of my friends were having problems with drugs and alcohol. And I was sort of a kid playing sports and sort of minding my own business, but I was realizing that my friends were changing because of drugs and alcohol, and it was mainly marijuana, but nobody wanted to talk about marijuana. Nobody wanted, where I grew up in Anaheim Hills, certainly, nobody wanted to admit that they were the drug family, right? They had a drug problem in their family, or that their neighborhood or community suffered from addiction in any way. It was denial, actually. And you all being here tonight is actually a testament opposite of that. So I'm very thankful for you being here and grateful that you're spending your time with us, because you're really here to learn, I hope, and to break out of the denial. Because this addiction, which is a disease of denial. It is something where the individual denies that it's a problem, the family denies it often, the community wants to shove it under the rug. We didn't certainly want to be the drug community. And I realized that this was an issue we needed to get more information about. And when I was 17, they introduced something called Prop 215, as you can remember that, in 1996. And I thought, well, I've had grandparents suffer from cancer. I've seen friends suffer from HIV. Who wouldn't want to relieve the suffering of people in these kinds of conditions? And then I started just doing what my teachers told me to do all the time, which is, read the fine print, read the details. Don't just listen to the headline. And when I read the fine print, I saw, well, wait a minute. This law is saying you could have a headache or a hangnail and get your weed. And then when we saw it implemented, we found out it was 98% of people who just said that they, had a little anxiety and didn't sleep 8 hours a night. And, one guy I heard went to the dispensary recently and said that he was nervous because his dog was sick. So he got his pot card. And because of being nervous. And I said, well, this isn't exactly what we're being sold. And that's actually how I got into this from a political science perspective is let's figure this out. Now, raise your hand if you are under 25 years old here tonight. I know some of your parents are trying to raise your hand, but I'm not going to. Okay, that's right. For those that are under 25, I'm not here to tell you not to do drugs. I hope you don't. I think that's a bad decision. I agree everything with what the judge says. But what I'm here to tell you instead of that is that you are dollar signs to a small number of people who want to get really rich. You are their future customers. They want you to be their future customers. And this whole thing about pot and marijuana and legalization and voting in November, it's not about anything else, as the judge said, other than money, other than getting literally a couple of people rich, who are already very rich, by the way, a couple of people even more rich, and hook you when you're young. Addiction is something that does not really usually start. It's happened, doesn't mean it never happens, but it doesn't start when you're over 30 years old. Addiction starts when you're young, when your brain is developing. And I'll show you pictures of what your brains look like, those of you who are under 25, to see how they are developing. And the business people know that. And they know that they have to addict you in order to make money. So this whole thing tonight and what we're talking about, and I will go over the science, and I do want to, especially the young people, to understand, if you do smoke weed, what it's doing to your brain. You should at least know that. But at the very least, you should know that you are targets from an industry that wants to make a lot of money. I wrote a book, if you want to learn more about this, called Reefer Sanity, 7 Great Myths About Marijuana. And I called it Reefer Sanity because, has anybody heard of Reefer Madness, the movie Reefer Madness? And again, now you're aging yourself if you've heard of it, because it was the people who are over 40 who've heard of it. And everyone under 40 is like, what is that? Well, Reefer Madness was a movie that they put out in the 1920s, and it talked about the dangers of pot, but it did a lot of exaggeration. Some of it was right. Some of it was maybe a little exaggerated, like movies. Movies exaggerate things a lot, right? And unfortunately, what that did, because it exaggerated it, a lot of my parents' generation thought, well, that was all wrong. What we're being told is all lies. So pot is perfectly fine because this movie and all the propaganda, it's wrong. And that attitude, I think, has clouded the judgment of, frankly, my parents' generation, a lot of whom think it's really not a big deal. Our friends used it in the 60s. We're all pretty much fine. What's the big deal if they want to legalize it? Let's get some tax money. Why not? They're going to use it anyway. Let's get it out of the hands of dealers and, get the IRS in charge, I guess. I don't know how that logic goes, but all right. But they want to do that. And they're saying we're going to fund schools. By the way, I haven't lived here in 20 years, so maybe I don't know what's happening lately or in the community when it comes to education, but the California lottery at the time, they said it was going to save the public education system in California, and you were going to have the #1 education system in the country. That's happened, right? Because that's what you were promised. That's why there's a lottery. There's not a lottery because people like to play games. I mean, some people do. But there's a lottery for the money for education, but it doesn't happen. And these are the false promises that get presented, frankly, to each generation. And so anyway, if you want to read more about the detail, I go through 7 myths. Tonight, I'm not going to go through all 7. We don't have the time, but I'm going to go through most of them. And I started a group. I worked in 3 White Houses since I've lived here. And this last time in the Obama administration, I sort of saw the writing on the wall about how legalization was being discussed more and more. And so I decided to leave to start an organization called SAM, Smart Approaches to Marijuana. I felt like we needed education and prevention. And that, as the judge said, we were just being fed lies from an industry that wanted to get rich, very simply. And that most people didn't know that. And actually, I realized that most young people don't know and don't remember what big tobacco did for 100 years in this country. Raise your hand if you're under 25 and you know what big tobacco even is. Well, so there's some of the smart people. There was one hand up here, and some of the officers, okay. Now, raise your hand if you're under 20 and you know who Joe Camel is. If I showed you a picture of Joe Camel, you could say that's Joe Camel. Right, there's a few hands that come up, but at the end of the day, this generation, the millennials, actually did not really grow up with a lot of what big tobacco did, so we forget. But for 100 years, we had an industry in this country that lied through its teeth to make billions of dollars while it made outrageous claims like tobacco isn't addictive. Tobacco doesn't cause lung cancer. Does anybody know when we actually found out when the link between tobacco and lung cancer? When did science figure that out? Anybody want to yell out a decade? 50s, 70s, and those are good guesses. But try 1926. Except the US government didn't admit it for 40 years, and then the tobacco companies didn't admit it until the year 2000, 80 years later. So we were deceived by an industry that was selling cigarettes literally like candy and saying that it was good for your health. And what I'm saying, we see a lot of the kids saying, how could they have done that? I know, you're older people, we got duped for a century. That this is part of the problem. And so my point is that this is just happening, this is history repeating itself. And now we're being told that pot is natural, that it's a plant, right? You've heard of that before, that weed is a plant. Well, you know what else is a plant? Poison ivy. And I want nothing to do with it. Who cares if it's a plant? The point is we've genetically changed this plant. We've altered it to increase the potency. And the industry is doing this to get more and more people addicted. So we started SAM to spread the message on this. And the SAM Action, which is the political group, is an education group and a political group. The political group is working with all the different major medical associations. But I have to tell you a story. When I went to the American Medical Association and all the other medical groups, I said, we need your help. We want to get the science out there, like the judge was saying. They said, Kevin, we've already talked about it. There's no debate in the scientific community about the harms of marijuana. That might be a debate in the public, but among scientists, we know the truth. And I said, well, that's great, but the public doesn't know that. And they said, really? You mean the average American doesn't read, we wrote a 450-page, 300,000-word monograph on the harms of marijuana to the body. You mean most Americans haven't read that? And I said, no. And they said, well, there was an article last week in the Journal of Lancet Psychiatry about the odds ratio of schizophrenia and marijuana. You mean that the average person isn't reading the Journal of Lancet Psychiatry before they go to bed at night? I said, no. The average person and the average 16-year-old, that's for sure, is Googling marijuana. Is marijuana addictive? What are the effects? And what are they seeing? They're not reading, I wish they were, but they're not reading the Journal of Lancet Psychiatry. That's just, scientists are known for a lot of things. PR is not one of them, okay? But what they are seeing are the hundreds of thousands of web pages sponsored by the drug industry, the pot industry, to say that this stuff is harmless and that it's not addictive and that it's medicine and that it's good for you and we should tax it. What they are seeing when they put marijuana, butane, hash oil in YouTube are 67,000 videos about how to make 98% potent waxes that if you vote in November in favor, will legalize those 98% waxes with zero regulation. So, again, as someone with a PhD who sort of was trained also as a scientist, I can say this. I said, listen, folks, doctors, with all due respect, we are trained to write articles that maybe, if we're lucky, 9 people in the world will read. That's like a good number. We're not trained to go out there. And so the problem is the science isn't being translated down to the average person who's busy, who's has a busy job, who's taking care of kids, who's not thinking about this 24/7 like those 12 of us in the world who are working on this, the judge being one of them. So the point is we wanted to start a group. And then I said, well, we don't want to make it political because sometimes it's these, today we're so hyper-partisan, it's incredible. So I said we want to make it non-political. So I wanted to get the most liberal person I could find and the most conservative person I could find to agree. So the most liberal person was, Senator Ted Kennedy's son, Patrick Kennedy, congressman from Rhode Island, John Kennedy's nephew. President's nephew, who clearly liberal Democrat, head of the Democratic Congressional Committee, I believe at one time. And he said, this is a no-brainer for me, Kevin, because I'm in recovery, he said, and I care about mental health. And you can't be in favor of marijuana if you care about mental health. And he does care about mental health because he was one of the architects. You're going to be so proud of your elected officials when I tell you something. Just wait till you hear this. It only took Congress 100 years to admit, hold on to your seats, that the brain is an actual part of the body. I'm serious. What do I mean by that? Think about it. With our healthcare system, we always said, well, if something's going on with your elbow, I was a tennis player here, so I had tennis elbow a lot, or I have a bad knee, or my hip. We go to the doctor and we get fixed. And no one judges you and says, well, why does your elbow hurt? What, are you hitting that tennis ball the right way? And I'm not sure I'm going to treat you because, your coach told you to do this and you're doing something else, and I don't think you should be. We would never hear that. But for things going on up here, depression, anxiety, mental illness, addiction, we would always segregate that part of the body. We would always say, well, if you have something going on up here, you don't see the doctor for that. First we said we're going to send you off far away to a big house and live with other people like you. Then we said that we can't afford that, so we let everyone out, and we said we're going to write you a prescription for a pill to make you better. And we've never dealt with this in a right way. So anyway, my point is Patrick helped, actually it was George Bush. He doesn't get any credit for this, and he should. President Bush's last thing he did before he left office was sign the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act, forcing insurance companies, although they still try and cheat about it, don't worry, forcing insurance companies trying to treat mental and physical health the same. Anyway, for Patrick, it was easy. Then we had to get a conservative because I thought we need to have a balance. Dick Cheney, unfortunately, didn't return any of my calls, and I was really upset about that. So we couldn't get him because I thought that would be good, right? Dick Cheney and a Kennedy. But we did get David Frum, who's a conservative writer who wrote all the speeches for George Bush for his first few years in office. David and Patrick don't agree on anything, but they agreed on this, and they still do, that we need to get the education and the science. And I'm telling you this because I want you to sort of get into my head a little bit about how this whole movement started and that we are pushing back. And people are realizing across the country that the communities they live in, they don't think pot shops are good for their communities. They may not want to see people go to prison for pot, and you know what? I don't either, by the way. And by the way, we have many uniformed law enforcement. I've never met anyone in law enforcement who says, yes, I spend all my time arresting and jailing people whose only crime is smoking a joint, and I love doing that. No, it doesn't even happen anyway. But there's this myth out there that all law enforcement ever does is deal with marijuana, and so we could free up their resources to really, target the bad guys as if they're not doing that already. But there's this false dichotomy that you either have to arrest somebody, put them in jail, or you have to legalize the drug. And I actually don't think you do either one. We don't want to imprison people, right, whose only crime, sorry, it's my bad, I closed it, whose only crime is smoking marijuana, but we also don't want to legalize it to increase the use because, folks, in this country, we're not exactly known for our restraint when it comes to advertising. You could say what you want about manufacturing in China. If you want to advertise anything, you don't go to China. You come here. We're the home of Philip Morris, Joe Camel, Big Pharma. You can't watch television without seeing 9 ads in 10 minutes for a pharmaceutical drug. Do you know we're the only country in the world that allows advertising for pharmaceuticals? Used to be us and New Zealand. And then it was us and I think Guinea-Bissau, but now it's just us. Guinea-Bissau came around. Good for them. We didn't. And I've worked for Democrats and Republicans, and I will tell you, the revolving door of special interests from the alcohol, pharma, and tobacco industries now, I don't care what party you're from, it's incredible. You can't keep up with the money being given. Congress people have 10 staff members. How are they going to be experts on 100 issues? Through lobbyists. And the lobbyists get paid handsomely. My question is, do we want those lobbyists for pot? They're already starting. And we are here in the 8th largest economy in the world. California, 8th largest economy in the world. This is a pot of gold for the industry, this state. And they see dollar signs on everything around this state, especially the young people, as we said. So I don't think it's this false dichotomy. I think we can do better than arresting and putting in prison or legalizing. But I think we should not do this, because this is really what we're talking about. We are talking about the marbleization of marijuana. As the judge said, you do not make money in the addictive business by promoting responsible use. Have you guys seen the alcohol commercials when it says, enjoy responsibly on the bottom? Folks, if everybody enjoyed alcohol responsibly, we wouldn't have an alcohol industry. They don't make money off of you if you drink a few beers on the weekend. They don't make money off of you if you waited till you're 21 and now you just enjoy a glass of wine with dinner. They don't care about you. I hate to break it to you for the non-alcoholics in the audience. But if you are an alcoholic, you're very important to them. Because in this country, 10% of everyone who drinks, 10%, is responsible for 75% of the revenue going to the alcohol business. Let me repeat myself. 1 out of every 10 drinkers funds 8 out of every $10 that the industry makes. So you have to increase heavy use. Think about if you go to Las Vegas, who gets the upgrade to the penthouse suite at the casino hotel? Is it the person who plays $50 blackjack once a year on their birthday? Or is it the person who's there probably every other day withdrawing $500 at the craps table to play roulette and craps? It's obviously that person, because that person is really funding these. It's the same thing. You have to encourage your best customers. And in this case, your best customers are addicts. They're people who shouldn't be using at all. They shouldn't be using any substance at all. They're a problem for the community, but they continue to use. There's a reason why in this country the taxes on alcohol are 80% less than during the Korean War. Now, for those of you under 25, they usually take out their phones and Google Korean War to find out the year, because they don't, in the early 1950s, okay? And I'm not saying we need to rate, my point is, this is the result of special interest groups. If you think we're gonna tax pot and make a lot of, don't worry, after everyone forgets in a couple of years that we're taxing pot, it will go down again. Because the special interests don't want pot to be expensive. They want it to be cheap, so more people use it. It's the same thing with alcohol, it's the same thing with tobacco. Let's go through some of the stats in this country. We've had an increase of marijuana use about 5% a year for the last 8 years. And that's a problem, but the bigger problem is that in this country, bear with me with this slide here, there are more daily users of marijuana than there ever has been in our history. 8 million Americans every day use pot. Now, if you're 60 years old, 70 years old, and you're in your basement smoking a joint once a month, as long as you're not getting in a car, performing surgery on me or flying a plane, because I travel a lot, I don't really care what you're doing. This isn't about that. And I know that we hear about the libertarian argument of, well, it's your right to do whatever you want. Yeah, well, until it affects me, it is. So I don't really care if you're that person. But if you're using it every day, unless you live under a rock, you're going to work, you're going to school, you're getting in a car, you have some kind of responsibility to someone else, it becomes a real problem. And in this country, the daily use of marijuana has skyrocketed. The daily use, by the way, binge drinking has also gone up. People like to say, maybe people will smoke pot and not drink, and they can choose one or the other. That doesn't happen in real life, folks. The heavy users, and you can talk to the judge and others, they're polysubstance users. They're using multiple substances. This isn't like, well, yeah, I use pot every day, but beer, I would never touch that. No. And we're hearing that in Colorado. We're saying, well, we want kids to make a safer choice, Kevin. We want them to use marijuana instead of alcohol because it's safer. Pot really mellows you out. Alcohol makes you really, violent. Folks, that's like saying to your kid, why don't you jump off of the fourth story window instead of the 8th story window? No, who cares which story? You're going to jump out of the window. It's not a good idea. I don't care 4th story, 8th story. So the point is, we've had this huge increase in daily use of marijuana, and that does become a problem. But why is it a problem? Because you might be thinking, who cares? I know a lot of people that smoke pot, and they're fine. I had a kid the other day say, Kevin, the first myth here, marijuana is harmless and non-addictive. I had a kid, a 16-year-old, raise his hand and say, Kevin, that's wrong. Marijuana is not addictive, okay? And I said, really, why do you think marijuana is not addictive? He said, marijuana's not addictive. I know it's not addictive because I use it every single day. And then the other kid said, marijuana makes me a better driver. Because you hear that. Actually, 20% of kids in a survey recently nationally said it makes them a better driver. I'm glad that most of the young people here are laughing at that. But this kid was dead serious. And I said, really, why does it make you a better driver? I want to know why you think you are better when you're stoned. He said, oh, Kevin, that's easy. He was kind of slow. I was sort of like, waiting. He said, well, I go 30 miles an hour in a 65 mile per hour zone. So that's safer. Going 30 in a 65 is just as dangerous as going 90 in a 65, by the way. Have you ever met somebody who uses marijuana? Are they exactly the the quickest person to the jump? Are their reaction time and reflexes? It's like they don't want you to use steroids if you play a sport, right? Baseball, you're a baseball player. It's great. Or football, you don't play. Let me tell you, they would love for you to use marijuana because it does the opposite. It doesn't enhance you. It detracts you. And people say, heroin is the deadly drug, not marijuana. No one's died from pot, Kevin. All right. But I may not call pot the deadly drug, although we can argue it has killed people. That's a separate conversation. But okay, let's not call it the deadly drug. I call it the dropout drug. You drop out of life. Those people who are using it every day, it becomes an obsession. Are there people that are just fine? Absolutely. Some people will be just fine. Guess what? Most smokers are just fine. They don't have lung cancer. That is not a reason to smoke. Most people who don't wear a seatbelt, I hope I can say, I'm in a room with 24 law enforcement, so I hope I can say this okay. They're going to watch me afterwards. But the stats are, most people who don't wear a seatbelt, they're not going to die in a car crash. But if you don't wear a seatbelt, you're 25 times more likely to die. Doesn't mean that it happens every time. The same thing is with marijuana. So people think, but I know somebody who smokes and they're smart. I know someone who smokes and they're fine, Kevin. They have a job. They're doing just fine. Frankly, they're better than the people I know who don't use marijuana. And my answer is big deal. One of the things you learn when you get a PhD is that the plural of anecdote, multiple anecdotes, multiple stories, are not evidence. Data isn't me and my friend and then this other person that I knew. And then I heard about my friend's friend who was doing that and they were fine. So, my sample is 4 people. We're all great. That shows you that. No. And there will always be exceptions to the rule. The point is you increase your risk. And let me tell you something. For those of you who are under 25, you're now competing in a world not with kids from Orange County. I hate to break it to you. And I don't just mean you're competing with LA. That's no. You're competing with the world. You're competing with the world for your livelihood, to get a job, to be successful in life, to be safe, to have a prosperous family. And pot isn't going to get you to the place you want to get to if you're ambitious in this global marketplace. I got to just tell you a little story. I was at the UN last week. I wasn't going to mention this, but I have to right now. I was at the UN in New York, United Nations, and it was kind of like, the beginning of those jokes. They say like the American, the Chinese guy, the Russian walk into a bar and, start talking. It was kind of like that because it was me, the American, South Korean, Singapore, China, walked into a room. We start talking. And they said, Kevin, we're hearing that your California, which is the largest economy in the Western Hemisphere, is basically going to legalize marijuana in November. Is that true? Is that the big debate? Why are you having that debate? And they sort of put it on to me, and I said, well, I sort of tried to change the subject. It's kind of embarrassing. I said, well, what are the debates you're having in your countries? I'm curious. In Singapore, The woman from Singapore said, oh, our big debate, Kevin? No, we're not debating drugs. We're debating whether or not we should pay teachers as much as we pay lawyers, because they're the future of our country. I said, all right, well, how about in China? What are you debating? We're debating whether or not the school day should be increased 60% or 50% because of this value we have on education. Then the other person, South Korea, said, we're debating whether or not the dropout rate in our country should be 1% dropout or 0.7% dropout rate. Kevin, so tell us about what you're debating again. I mean, it was embarrassing. I have to tell you, we're debating about where the gummy bear should be grape flavor or cherry, whether we should have 10 pot shops in a community or 50. They're debating how they're going to get ahead in the global economy. And they're going to get your jobs, by the way. I mean, we're talking about we're international trade and the global workforce. It's just incredible to me when I just zoom out a little bit, and we'll talk more about the science, but that it's like, what happened with the priorities? That we think that a drug that makes you slow increases your chance of being dumb. I'm sorry, I will tell you that. It does. That we're now talking about, let's make it more available. Because, our alcohol policy is so good, right? No kids under 21 drink, right? Because it's illegal, right? You've never heard of any 20-year-old, that's right, yeah. We've done such a wonderful job with pharmaceuticals. Those are regulated, folks. They call them legal, regulated. They're killing more people than car crashes every year. That's legal. Cigarettes, 100 years of lies. I've never seen us putting public health and safety in front of private profit. Unfortunately, I hate to be so cynical, private profit wins out with the politicians every single time. So I'm not convinced that we can just get it right this time. I've never been convinced of that at all. But let me tell you about the addiction issue, because it's important. This is what your brain is looking like from the time you were born. This is from 0 to age 20. I put 20 here. Here's the average teenager here. What does this mean? Well, you see the colors are changing, right? The blue is coming into play more. This is the front of your brain right here. This is looking at it from like a bird's eye view. And essentially your gray matter is coming into play as you get older. What does that mean? It means you make better decisions when you're older. It means that you care more about the future when you're older, and you're figuring out what the things are that you like or dislike. And it's an amazing time to look at your brain, because when it's developing, you're forming your preferences in life. You're figuring out what you like, you're figuring out what language, have you heard a 3-year-old can pick up a language like this, right? A second language versus a 35-year-old. Think about swimming. Swimming is dangerous. Can you imagine if we said to the children, we're not going to teach you how to swim at age 4 because it's really dangerous. Just wait till you're 45. And then, because then you'll know what to do. No, at 4 we teach them because they'll pick it up faster. It's sports. Can you imagine if most pro sports players didn't ever play sports or really focus until they were 30? No, you start when you're young. That's when you pick up your muscle memory. You learn all these kinds of things. But the flip side is your brain can also be affected by negative things: child abuse, neglect, drugs, alcohol. And if those things happen when you're younger, well, they're more likely to stay with you the rest of your life. Adult abuse is a terrible thing, but you're much more likely to get over it quicker than if you had sustained abuse as a child and your brain was impacted in the development. One other kind of abuse is drugs and alcohol. And alcohol, of course, your brain has no idea what drugs are legal and illegal. So alcohol is a drug. Just because it's legal, it doesn't matter. And when it affects your brain, when it comes into contact with your brain, essentially, depending on the drug, it affects the way this brain is developing. And for marijuana, we know, and it's sort of hard to see here, that it affects these parts of the brain. This is coordination. So your brain, when you are born and when you're young and older, your brain starts developing in the back. And then it goes around and it develops in the front last. Judgment. Makes sense. Your judgment is better when you're 30, probably, than when you're 5. But you learn coordination, vision, memory, movement, your coordination and all of that comes into play. It's sort of coming into being when you're 7, 8, 10 years old. Judgment, reward, and memory. This is the memory section, and this is the reward. This is the part of the brain that tells you that you really like something. When you figure out that you like chocolate better than strawberry or whatever for ice cream, yeah, that's the part of your brain that figures out what it likes. And what happens with addiction is essentially when you take that drug, for marijuana, we have different parts of the brain, these parts that have the colors, that receive the active part of marijuana. The active part is THC. Let me just say, marijuana is 500 components. It is a plant. It has hundreds of components as part of it. One of the chemical components that gets you high, the main one, is THC. What happens is THC enters your brain, and these parts of the brain that I just mentioned get altered in some way, and it depends on the person, how much it will alter you. You know, we all know the person who can drink coffee until midnight and go straight to bed. Caffeine is a drug. We also know the person who cannot touch coffee after 4 because they're going to be up all night. Everyone's different. Guess what? You don't know whether you're an addict or not, or mentally, you have no idea. That's why it's also a risk. It's Russian roulette. You're taking a risk that you're going to be okay. And some people are okay, but a lot of people aren't. And what happens in addiction, especially with marijuana, but really all drugs, is that those people who really like it, this reward that tells you that you like chocolate or strawberry, it also tells you whether or not you like the drug. And that you remember whether you like it or not. This is memory, and here they work together. Reward and memory, yellow, memory, purple, reward. And so you essentially, addiction is not a fancy definition, folks. It's a very simple one. You did something that your brain said it liked a lot. It remembered that it liked it, and it wanted to do it again. That's it. That's addiction. And for marijuana, if you start using when you're 14, about 20% of people's brains will say, we really liked it, and we want to do it again, no matter what. No matter whether our parents say yes, no, whatever, I'm going to go to jail, I don't care, I want it. When you're 16, if you try it, your chances thankfully go down, but they're still pretty high. About 16% of 16-year-olds' brains will say, I really liked it, and I'm going to do it again, no matter what. And it affects these parts of the brain. Now, why is it affecting these parts of the brain? Well, as the judge mentioned, the THC that I talked about that gets you high, THC, this is 1960. This is 2000, and well, this is about 2013, 2011, okay? From 1960 to 2011, 2013, the potency of marijuana has skyrocketed. Anyone around at Woodstock? You don't have to admit it. I know this is Orange County. No one's going to admit that, but that's okay. You've changed. That's good. If you were at Woodstock smoking marijuana, unless you were smoking Mexican marijuana, which was very expensive and hard to come by, you were smoking 2% THC. You were separating the leaves from the twigs, from the seeds. You couldn't get any THC. It just wasn't happening. But we've become better farmers. It's a bottom line. We've become much better at agriculture, genetic engineering, and breeding plants to get better plants. And so we've become better at taking the marijuana plant and saying, we don't want the other stuff, we want the THC, because that's what gets you high. And we've bred THC, and now the average is about 12%, 13%. Now, there are many other components in marijuana, as I mentioned. I'll mention this later, but one of them is called CBD. Has anybody heard of CBD before? Cannabidiol? Some of you have. We think it might be good for seizures for kids, but it's still being studied. The point is, it doesn't get you high. When you have CBD, your brain here is not activated. The brain doesn't care really about CBD that much. CBD does not get you high. It actually takes the high away, interestingly enough. CBD is almost zero. You know, the people growing pot, they don't want to give you CBD. They want to give you what's going to get you high, because that's why you're taking it. Most people, that's why they're using it. What else we've learned to do in the last 20 years, folks, forget about 12% THC. We've learned to make 98% THC. Butane hash oil, it's sometimes called. Honey oil, it's sometimes called. Wax, shatter, dabbing. It's like the verb is dabbing. I'm going to dab. I'm going to take a dab, whatever. The point is, it's up to 98% THC, the potency. And let me tell you, no scientist is studying what this does to your brain. I wish they were. There's a lot of reasons why they're not, but they're not. We have no clue. We know what the 5% THC does. It really messes your brain up. 98%, talk about a social experiment. You are a lab rat for society. We don't have any idea and let me tell you, probably it's worse. That's my educated guess, that 98% THC. is probably worse than 5%. Because the reason why during Woodstock people weren't going to the emergency room, but then in 2004 we had 300,000 people, and in a couple years ago, now we have even more, we had close to 500,000 emergency room admissions for marijuana. That is almost as much as cocaine, and by the way, it's much more than heroin. The reason why is because it's the high potency THC. And it's producing what we call, well, psychiatrists would call it a psychotic break. That sounds really scary, but it's basically an extreme nervous reaction to something. It's hallucinations sometimes. It's thinking that the walls are coming to get you. It's freaking out because you really shouldn't use it, and then you did, and then you don't know what to do, and your parents are going to find out. And that's a psychotic. That can be simple from that to, a psychotic break. And, there was a 16-year-old 2 weeks ago. Did you hear about the one in Seattle who died? They thought it was a hate crime because he was Muslim. And they said that his friend didn't like that he was Muslim and he pushed him off the balcony. So they thought it was a hate crime. Then they did the coroner report and they did the investigation. They said it wasn't a hate crime. It was his best friend. He happened to be Muslim, but that had nothing to do with what happened to him. What happened to him was that he had a pot candy bar. And he thought it was a candy bar with a little bit of pot. How bad can it be, right? It looks like chocolate. I mean, it looks great. We all would want a bite. Except he had, I think, about 4 or 5 bites. And then he was fine. And then 20 minutes later, because when you eat marijuana, it takes some time to hit your brain. Smoking goes straight to your brain. That's why, you can stop smoking. You can kind of control that. It's not good, but you can sort of control a little bit. When you eat the edible, it's in your system. There's no turning back. And he ate the 5 bites of a chocolate bar. I think it was either a chocolate bar or a cookie. It was something like that. And he had a psychotic reaction. He was very upset that he did this. He couldn't feel his body. He fell off the balcony, and he died. And his family said, they said pot doesn't kill. They told us that marijuana is harmless. It's legal in Washington, which is where it happened, and it doesn't kill people. Why did this happen to our son? So the point is, these things, and then what did the company say that created the bar? They said, first of all, he's under 21, so he shouldn't have been using our product. But if you do use our product, you have to have the correct serving size. Do you know what that is on the pot candy bar? 1/10 of the candy bar. Can you remember the last time you had 1/10 of any candy bar? Then the gummy bear manufacturer, because they make gummy bears with marijuana, said, people are eating way too much of the serving. They're eating the whole bag of gummy bears. They should never do that. Well, what's the serving size? 1 ear. 1 ear of the gummy bear was a serving size for one of the companies. Folks, it sounds ridiculous. If it sounds ridiculous, it is. It's out of control because the industry is in charge when you legalize, period. And the people who legalized it in Colorado, the moms and dads who look like many of you and are like many of you in here, 4 years ago when they were voting, they were sitting in rooms just like this, but they didn't know that they were voting on gummy bears being legal for pot. They didn't know they thought they were legalizing some joints for, some old hippies and stuff like that, adults. They didn't know that it was the candy and the cookies and the advertising of all of these products. Hopefully now you know. We need you to spread the word because guess what? We're against a $20 million machine that's how much they're going to spend, that wants to legitimize this. I'm going to go through these studies very quickly, but by the way, all of this will be available to you. I will, if you signed up here, you can have a copy. You can use it. Use it in your community, please. Take credit for it. You can say you worked all year on this. Have at it. You're an expert. We need the message spread because the issue is when you look at the studies about education, because people care about education in here. When you look at the studies, if you start using marijuana younger and more common, you are much more likely to drop out of school. Doesn't mean everybody drops out of school, but you're much more likely to drop out of school. You're much more likely to get lower grades when you're trying to get into colleges. And the big study that came out a few years ago, you are significantly more likely to lose 8 points on the IQ scale. What does 8 points mean? Well, Any geniuses in the room? Any Steve Jobs, like 150 IQ? No? You look like a genius. No, you're not. Okay. You're honest. Because a lot of times when I ask, every parent raises their hand, they think that their kid is a genius in the rooms. I got to say, I hate to break it to you. You can't not all your kids can be geniuses, but okay. I'm glad we have an honest room here. The point is, if you're a genius, maybe you can get away with losing 8 points on the IQ scale. You're going to be very smart, still, even when you lose 8 points. But if you're an average student, 100 IQ in California, 100. You lose 8 points off of the 100 and you're down to 92. That is the difference between getting a job or not. That is the difference between graduating from the school you felt you deserved to go to versus the school you had to settle for or not graduating at all. And so, we really have to think about how this is going to affect educational outcomes, because marijuana is the dumbing down drug. It's the dropout drug. It's the dumbing down drug. And if you use it enough, your brain slows down. It's just that simple. You don't process things quick. I mean, I can't tell you. Memory, unfortunately, is probably the number one thing you use throughout school. You have to remember things. And you aren't able to remember them as much. Unemployment, welfare, all of these things over and over again increase. Suicide attempt, other drug use. Don't let people tell you that marijuana can't lead to other drugs. For a lot of people, it doesn't. But for 99% of heroin, cocaine, and methamphetamine users, as the judge said, alcohol and marijuana were a pivotal part of their early drug use. I have never met a mom and dad, and I sadly have met dozens of moms and dads who have lost kids, many kids at the age that we're seeing here, to opiate overdoses over the last few years. Not one of them said that marijuana was not part of it. Every single one of them talked about how their kids started down a path where marijuana was all they needed. They never dreamed they would ever go to heroin. Oh my God, heroin? No, it's just marijuana. Then their brain said, I need something better than marijuana. The brain wanted to get it higher in a much bigger way. And the science on the reward pathway in the brain for marijuana and opium is a fascinating one that's emerging. We don't know enough about it. But folks, in 1900, tobacco still caused lung cancer. We didn't know everything there was to know about it. In 1960, pregnant women were still smoking. Didn't mean that the smoking was okay. It just means not all of us knew about it. We're repeating history. You are living at a time. None of us were around 150 years ago when we legalized tobacco, and I don't think any of us were around 5,000 years ago when we legitimized alcohol. Alcohol has been legitimized in Western culture since before the Old Testament, okay? We weren't around then. We're not to blame for those things in terms of the public health impact. But we have to decide, you are living in an era right now. It's a pivotal time in history. It's incredible, actually. Think about it. Where the people alive right now, will decide whether or not to legitimize a third intoxicating substance in this country, to commercialize it and normalize it. That is critical. Not since 150 years ago have we made that decision. Because once we go and open those doors to the industry, good luck turning back. And we have to think about that, as future impact. Folks, don't worry. California is not alone in low educational outcomes. For math, science, and reading, this country, as much as we try and spend on education, this country ranks near the bottom. And other countries that really do not have the means that we have rank much higher than us. And yet we're the top country for marijuana, one of the top countries for marijuana use among young people. My question is, you may not care about pot, but how does marijuana help students be smarter? How does it help our community? It doesn't. It can only hurt our community, and yet we're looking at legitimizing it. And then the mental health issue is huge. I'm not going to talk about it too much because there's not time. But the incidences of mental illness, schizophrenia, psychosis, rapidly increase when you start using marijuana regularly. If you tried marijuana once and you're not using it anymore, you're not going to get a marijuana-related schizophrenia, okay? But if that one time turns into 5 times a week, turns into the weekends, or whatever, you are increasing your risk every single day. Car crashes is another huge issue. 2 times as likely if you're intoxicated on marijuana. And people say, well, Kevin, what about alcohol? You're 5 times likely for alcohol. Yeah, so what? Exactly. You shouldn't drink and drive. We shouldn't legitimize marijuana and drive. So I think that the gulf has never been greater between what the science is saying and what the public really is misunderstanding. And if you think about how did we actually get here, because people say, Kevin, we know the science. Why are we having this debate? And the judge brought it up, and we can't not talk about. We're here in California. You can't ignore the issue of medical marijuana. But let me tell you something. The judge is right when he says this was a political strategy to legitimize pot, because in psychology there's something called a permission structure. Does anybody know what that means? What that means is that in order to be convinced of something, you have to kind of give yourself permission that it's okay to think that way. So for pot, a lot of people were against it. But the permission structure came when they said they needed it for cancer and other, compassion. So a lot of people said, well, I don't really like pot, but I'm okay with it if it's really just for compassion reasons. Then I'm okay with it. It was a brilliant PR strategy. The reality is the answer actually to is marijuana medicine, is really, talk about a Washington, D.C. answer. The answer is no, yes, and maybe. And just hear me out for a minute, okay? The answer is definitely no when it comes to smoking or vaporizing or eating marijuana that you buy at the, Cheech and Chong's dispensary over there, okay? We don't, does anybody remember a time where we vote on medicine? I think we did with Laetrile, the apricot pit, and it killed hundreds of people. But other than that, do we vote on medicine? No. Now, let me tell you something else. This is going to sound radical. You're going to think I'm crazy. But shouldn't medicine come from, pharmacies prescribed by doctors? I know that sounds crazy, right? Why is marijuana, I don't care if it has medical value or not, just think about this. Why with marijuana do we say, this is a medicine, it's legitimate, we need it? Okay, we're gonna put it in a pharmacy. No, we don't want it, no. Doctors, no. We're gonna have a separate little thing by the pizza shop, and we're gonna have this 18-year-old without a high school education, and he's gonna recommend something for Granny called, Super Silver Haze for her pain. That's not medicine. If it's medicine, have a dosage. Give it to a doctor and a pharmacy. And I've never met, again, a member of law enforcement who would disagree with the idea that if the FDA, which is important, that they don't always get it right, but they are important to determine what medicine is. If the FDA said, yes, you know what, it does come from pot, but this oil here or whatever, this is safe and effective and it should be in a pharmacy. I've never met a police officer that would say, oh no, we should never have that. No. We should do legitimate medicine. So there are actually, who knew that today there's even a pill at a pharmacy called Marinol? Doesn't mean it's the only kind of thing, but there is a pill there legal. And it's been legal for 40 years. It's not a controversy. So there are things at pharmacies, and there should be more. Fine, do the research. And really, that's where this comes from. The maybe answer is really because there is research going on right now to determine, like the CBD, whether or not that should be good for kids. Look, if your kid has 100 seizures a day, you're desperate. I get it. You want to help them. We should make sure, though, that what you use to help them doesn't make them worse. Did you know that the FDA did 20 letters last month to these companies selling CBD on the internet? Why? They found there were contaminants, mold, pesticides, THC. These companies were selling to these desperate parents who were desperate for something different because nothing was helping their children with the seizures. And these companies said, ooh, yeah, I got here, take CBD oil. These are not legitimate companies. We have to regulate it the right way, like a medicine, not like a pot shop with a dispensary that sells gummy bears that are supposed to be THC medical gummy bears. Let's have legitimate medicine. This is the myth about people being in prison for pot. Let me tell you, that is one of the biggest myths of our time. we did the analysis in the Bush administration, and when I went in the Obama administration, the first day I said we have to do an analysis because we don't want to say it's Republican or Democrat. This is not about Republican or Democrat. This is about lists of facts. And when you look at the facts, less than 0.4% of state prisoners are incarcerated for marijuana, and less than 0.1, it doesn't even register, are marijuana-only possession with no priors. And by the way, those people are usually folks who had trafficking, and then they gave some information about a dealer, and then they went down to possession. I mean, in this state, nobody is getting anything more than a ticket, violation, infraction for a joint of marijuana because it's been decriminalized for so many years. So the myth is, let's legalize so we can get people out of prison. That's not going to get people out of prison because they're not there for that. They might have marijuana on their record, but by the way, they were also, drunk driving, then they had a joint in their pocket. They also were robbing somewhere or committing some violent crime. They happen to have a joint in their pocket. Yeah, that's different. But if your only crime is a joint or two, you're not in prison for it. And then the big thing is that if we legalize marijuana, we should really treat it like alcohol and tobacco because we won't have gangs. This is a lot of text, but let me just tell you, gangs and cartels really don't care about marijuana that much. If you legalize it, they're not going to go away. Now, they're involved in the marijuana trade, that's for sure. But you know what else they're involved in? Human trafficking, kidnapping, extortion, political crimes, heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine. And let me tell you, they're making all new kinds of methamphetamine. I mean, we're not talking about that tonight. The judge is probably seeing it. I'm guessing the chief is seeing it. Methamphetamine is on the rise, the importation of a new kind of methamphetamine from Mexico. Nobody's talking about, because we want to talk about heroin, and I understand that, but we have to be looking at the meth issue, especially in a state like California. My point is, these are transnational criminal groups. They don't care about marijuana, they care about money. And they're making money by all sorts of things. Do you know what else they're making money from? $700 billion a year in what? Cigarettes. Illegal cigarettes. Because we tax cigarettes. And you could buy cigarettes really cheap down in South Carolina. I live in New York now. Do you know how much a pack of cigarettes are? They're like $14 a pack with the tax. You go down to South Carolina and buy them in bulk, they're $4 a pack. Well, what's going to happen? You're going to have tax evasion. And guess what? The pot shops in California, do you know that 70% of them, they found out they have tax evasion? Surprise, surprise. They're dealing with an illegal drug. You're going to have tax evasion. This is happening. So the cartels aren't flying away if you legalize marijuana in California. Let me tell you, they're going to be here bigger than ever. In Colorado, it's never been a better time to be a drug dealer because you can undercut the legal price and you can beat the marijuana stores because you're not charging a tax. And are people going to want to pay the tax or not? They're not going to want to pay the tax, so they're doing that. I'm going to go quick because I know we have to probably wrap up. I want to show you the face of marijuana today. This face is not Cheech and Chong or Willie Nelson or, they said that was some of the celebrities. I don't even think they're the face of it anymore. The face of marijuana, folks, and the industry are guys that look like me. They're in the suits. They're wearing nicer suits than me, actually. And some people say he looks like me, and I'm kind of offended by that. But anyways, they really are, though. They're the guys that I went to college with that are the MBAs, business geniuses. Talk about geniuses. One of them said, I don't smoke pot. I have to make my meetings on time. Why would I use pot? We just want to make money from it. That's what the tobacco industry's executives, too, said, by the way. A lot of them never smoked. It's amazing. 60% of America smoked in 1950. The tobacco executives didn't because they knew what it was doing to your body. It's the same kind of thing. But folks, this isn't the tobacco executives, down in South Carolina anymore. These are the Silicon Valley, or Seattle-based or Wall Street guys that want to make a lot of money. And they look like very respectable people. And you wouldn't say that, oh yeah, they're the hippie that hasn't showered in a week. No. These guys have showered every day, and they look great, and you want them over for Thanksgiving, and you want them to marry your daughter, and they look wonderful. But they are the ones making money, and they are the ones that want to go into communities. And I know we're in a diverse community here. Guess where the pot shops are in Colorado? Where are they located? In the poorer communities. You go to the places where there aren't a lot of resources. You know, in Baltimore and Washington, D.C., I don't know how it is in L.A. I'm guessing L.A. and Orange County aren't that different. There are 8 times as many liquor stores in the poorest areas of the community than the rich communities. Well, because you want to go to the places where if something goes wrong, they can't go to the rehab. They can't afford rehab, really. They don't have the backup if something goes wrong. If you're one of the celebrities and something goes wrong, as you said, Judge, you can pay $100,000 a month to the Malibu Treatment Center, and you're still going to make a lot of money. This is the issue. These folks are preying on the most vulnerable people, our youth, frankly, poorer communities, and they're doing things like packaging things like Marley Natural. They bought the name Bob Marley for $50 million. This is just one example from the family of Bob Marley. So now you have the guy who led the revolution in the reggae is now represented by these guys. I mean, it's amazing. And I do like to remind people of the tobacco industry, and I just like to show the pictures because, especially the young people, they think that I made this in Photoshop. They don't think it's real. It seems like it's not real, but it wasn't that long ago, folks, that we called asthma cigarettes. Yeah, you heard it right, medical tobacco. We said it was for your health, Dr. Batty's asthma cigarette. Then in the 1950s, we said more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. We had doctors promoting smoking cigarettes. And it wasn't even that long ago. In fact, I think even when I went to high school, we had a smoking patio if you were a junior or senior where you could go smoke. Can you believe it? Wasn't that long ago. I'm not that old. The point is, this is private profit over public health once again, and we're seeing it over and over, and we need to remind ourselves. And guess what? Money for your communities. People say, well, I don't like pot, but I'm going to vote for it to get money. It's not happening. The money has to go to regulation, which is atrocious. They just had 40 recalls last year in Colorado of legal pot. They were recalling it because of the pesticides, the molds, like I told you, the bacteria, the contaminants. And the industry is fighting any sensible regulation. Anytime the legislature says, okay, well, we've had 40 recalls. Maybe we should change the way that, the requirements for growing pot. Just let's change it. They're against it. It would hurt their bottom line. They need to get as much out as possible. And so even the New York Times, which is a very pro-pot newspaper, sad to say, they had an article saying marijuana taxes will not save state budgets. It's not saving the state budget. By the way, alcohol and tobacco isn't saving the state budgets either. We tax those. Do you know how much alcohol costs society? $250 billion a year. Guess how much taxes we get from alcohol? $16 billion. What about tobacco? Tobacco, like I told you, $15 a pack in New York. Boy, is it taxed. We get $33 billion. Sounds like a lot, doesn't it? We spend $314 billion. That means for every dollar in tax revenue that the city or state or country collects, we have to pay 10 to clean up the mess. And so the idea is marijuana is going to bring mess as well if more people use it, if we have an industry. I'm going to skip through this quickly. I do want to show you Colorado a little bit. You're not going to be surprised because in California with the medical shops, you have this. But this looks like a candy store. It doesn't look like a pot shop. These are the gummy bears you also have, and the Tootsie Rolls, and I'll go over this very quickly, the edibles. This is the show your ski pass and receive a $1 joint with purchase. This is the sodas, the ice creams, the cartoon. You can't be a parent and open the newspaper because you're worried about a pot cartoon character that your 5-year-old's going to see. You can't see this. This is a billboard. This is technically illegal in Colorado. Doesn't matter. It happens all the time. This billboard says free dab. Remember what a dab is? Remember what I said it was? 98% THC. Free samples. It's kind of like Costco. We're going to give you the free samples, and you have to be a member and come on in. It's very similar. And let me tell you, Costco, when you have the sample, I always end up buying so much stuff that I don't need because I had the sample. You feel bad. This is the same thing. They want your kids and you to try 98% THC because maybe you're going to be one of the people who really likes it, and then you're going to be part of their revenue stream again. Some more pictures. These are just some of the, I mean, you have these, I know, in some of the newspapers here, but the coupons, all of the this is illegal to have a cartoon character. Doesn't matter, they have them anyway. These are all, this took us 5 minutes to put together. This is not like a study here, but you have to see the advertising. And this is what they want to do across the country. Yeah. So the number of parents calling poison lines have skyrocketed. The 5-year-old is seeing a gummy bear and eating it. What's going to happen if it's a pot gummy bear? Well, you're going to go to the emergency room if you're 5 and you have THC into your little brain. The treatment centers, they don't have enough treatment slots, especially for kids, because kids think it's legal for them too, even though it's not. It doesn't matter. They bring it to school, they have problems. DUIs, car crashes for pot. This isn't a coincidence, folks. Look at Washington State before legalization. They were using marijuana before. I'm not saying that it was non-existent. Yeah, they were using it, but they were stable, 20% or so. It has skyrocketed ever since legalization passed. The AAA, did you see that study in Washington? They just came out with a study 2 weeks ago, AAA, the car club, saying that fatal car crashes have skyrocketed in Washington. Colorado, it's the same thing. So I'll leave these stats. There's so many stats here. Workplace. If anybody owns a small business, good luck. If anyone owns a big business in the state, good luck with legalized pot, because you now have a liability lawsuit that the lawyers love, but it's going to be huge liability for you. Marijuana stays in your system for a long time. Alcohol, in and out of your system. Marijuana, in your fat. It stays in your system. You test positive on Monday. Even if you used it on Friday, you're testing positive. Your employer is saying, we're firing you. You're testing positive for marijuana. You say, no, it's legal. I used it on Friday, not today. You can't fire me. Good luck with the lawsuit, workers' comp, insurance claims. All of these things are going up. The largest construction company in Colorado, they can't hire anybody who will test negative for pot. They have to go out of state now. So it does affect the economy. I'm going to leave all this for you. Well, there's a lot of stats on workplace and employees. If you're interested in that, I want to leave this with you. I want to talk about, just if I have time, like two or three more slides, Chief. I want to talk about the California issues, because these are specific to your state. In November, you need to know what you're voting on. You need to know that you're voting on something that will allow very limited local control. Right now, for example, this city has a ban on pot shops, medical, right? If the thing in November passes, these things are going to be very difficult to ban, the way they wrote the law. Guess what they also wrote in the law? Pot clubs, which you don't have now. What do I mean by a pot club? I mean it's like a bar for marijuana. You go there and you usually drive, because this is California, and you consume pot on premises, in the club, in the bar, and then you leave. That will be legal. Guess what else will be legal? Marijuana Advisory Committee with a ton of industry representatives. Billboards, this is the coupon from before, event sponsorships, there's no regulation. They're saying we're going to regulate it. They will allow advertising if this gets legal in this state. Guess what else they're going to allow? Gummy bears, Tootsie Rolls, lollipops, ice cream, sodas. All of the things that are bringing the problems in Colorado and Washington will become legal. Guess what else will become legal? The concentrates, the 98% THC that I talked about. And let me tell you in my mind, one of the most atrocious things if California votes. Guess what else happens? Convicted heroin and meth dealers could sell marijuana and get a license. Now, if that's not a recipe for corruption and organized crime, to have a legal marijuana store owned by a convicted heroin, meth, cocaine dealer, dealing with God knows what else, I don't know what else would be to make it more corrupt. How many people here knew that this was what you're voting on in November? Like, specifically? No. Yeah, one very smart person in the back, who I think is the finance chair of the No campaign, by the way. She is. But that's true. Because the point is, they're trying to say it's about regulation. Folks, there's no regulation. They're trying to say it's about safety and keeping it out of the hands of kids. How does making a pot gummy bear keep it out of the hands of kids? And it's really up to us to educate our neighbors. Because I know, I don't really care if you think pot is good or bad or adults should use it or not. This is not about you. This is not about the adults in this room, I just have to say. This is about your kids. This is about whether or not you want the advertising and the big business machine to come in. You are leading I'm so proud. California, my home state, is leading the world on tobacco regulation, right? It's like the 21 and you can't, where can you smoke legally anymore in this state? I don't think, in the ocean, do they let you do it? No, you can't. They said you can't do it in the ocean. Maybe in your car, but if you ever want to sell your car, I can't find a smoker who would buy a car that has been smoked in, okay? You can't, and you certainly can't do it at home if you live with a spouse that doesn't smoke, because they're going to kick you out in a heartbeat, right? You can't smoke. You have so many which is good. You're saving lives. We learned the hard way, don't forget, 100 years of lies and deceit, but finally we came around. Okay. The question is, how can we do that and then roll out the red carpet for pot gummy bears and pot bars? If you go somewhere and smoke a cigarette and drive home, you're not going to get into a car crash because of the smoking of a cigarette. Now, I'm not telling the kids here to smoke cigarettes. You shouldn't do that. It'll probably kill your lungs. But the point is, it doesn't impair you. But we're now saying we're going to allow pot clubs where then you drive home. You do get impaired with marijuana. It messes with your mind. With tobacco, it's addictive, but you don't have a psychotic break. Yeah, in your lungs, obviously. But with marijuana, it's affecting the way your mind is working. And what they're trying to do in California is bring profits home for the few people to get rich. So I think in the last minute, there's a lot we can do. Vermont just voted against this. It's not inevitable, folks. They're going to tell you it's inevitable. You're helpless. That's called Psychology 101. Tell people they're helpless, then they won't do anything, and then you're going to get your desired outcome. You're not helpless. You voted against this in 2010, okay? So Vermont, folks, it's the home of Bernie Sanders. They're pretty liberal too, okay? It's not just California. They always want to blame California for being liberal. I always remind them, Vermont, Boston, okay? There's both sides here. Vermont, they didn't want to change Vermont. They said, yeah, we don't care about pot, but we don't want this in our community. We don't want pot gummy bears sold to our kids. That's not what we're about in Vermont. They voted against it. Ohio, they were going to make the 10 richest people in Ohio even richer if they passed this. It lost 66% to 33% last year. They don't want this either. People are waking up, I think, when they learn about it, they're realizing, I don't want a pot shop in my community. And so we do need all of your support. This is why here, and we do have a representative from the campaign here, but we just want to be here to educate you. We're working with multiple groups around the country in different states. In California, we're working with the Coalition for Responsible Drug Policies. And the point is, if you want to get involved in your community, there are a lot of ways you can do that. We can tell you later. We're going to be around in the front here if you want to learn how to become a more active in this. Maybe you just came here to learn and you're going to take it home and digest it a little bit. Totally understand. But maybe you want to do something. And we don't have $20 million, because the people who don't want this, it's that rich group of teachers and social workers, the real rich, deep-pocketed, So we're not the business, we're not the Silicon Valley billionaires. So there isn't, if you want to get rich, you're not, you should vote, you should be with the yes side, get a job with them, they have a lot of money. But if you care about your community and you don't want the pot shops and you want to do something, please let us know. We think there's a lot that can be done in the next 6 months. This will be the most pivotal public health policy that this state has voted on in a very, very long time, and you voted on a lot of public health issues. This is the most pivotal because you're going to decide whether or not, and it's up to you, we're not telling you to vote yes or no, but you will decide, whatever you do, yes or no, whether or not you're going to have an out-of-state and really big business industry come in and make money really off of your kids more than off of you. or you're going to leave a better generation legacy for future generations. So I'm done, but my personal email is here, kevin@learnaboutsam.org. If you want these presentations and if you want to learn more, actually our website is learnaboutsam.org. I want to give a heartfelt thanks to the Fountain Valley Police Department, the chief and the rest of the group here for having me, and really all of you for spending many hours with us on a very busy weeknight, I know, to learn and hear more about this issue. So we'll be in front to answer any questions, but thank you so much for coming in. I hope you learned something. Thank you. Chief.
I want to thank you once again for taking time out of your schedule. Just to recognize again Judge Anderson and Dr. Sabet. Before I let you go, so to speak, I just want to recognize the work of some people, particularly George Mavitsakis, management analyst at the police department, Lieutenant Rob Sueza from the police department, Scott Baker from the Recreation Community Services, and Neil Weissman, who is our sound professional, and he puts on the sound for us. And I just want to leave you with this. Earlier today, as I said, I got a rousing round of applause from a bunch of children. And they were there listening to a bike safety lecture from one of our officers. And the officer asked me to drop by and say hello, so of course I did. I didn't know I was going to get a round of applause. If I'd known, you wouldn't have had to ask me. But it was so neat to be there with these kids. And there was probably 140 kids in this kind of large classroom. And based on what we heard today, who in this room is willing to write off about 35 of those kids and just say, if all of them smoke weed at some point, about 35 of them are going to end up addicts? I can tell you, I can speak for every cop in this room, there's not a one of us that wouldn't rush into that room and keep them from a mortal danger if that was present. And I bet I could count on some of the parents in this room to do the same. What is the difference? This is an important fight that we have on our hands in our community. And I can tell you that your police department and your city is committed to your safety and to the safety of your kids. That's why we were here today. I hope it was of use to you. Please let us know if we can be of further service. Thank you and good night.